It was a gift. It was a gift.
My name is Eloin Keating. I'm 30 years old, and for most of my adult life, I measured love in hours, worked, and dollars saved. I wasn't born into marble floors or skyline views. I was raised on the steam of diner coffee, the hiss of a flat-top grill at one mile, and the sight of my parents coming home with grease on their cuffs and apologies on their lips for missing another school play. So when I finally had enough to do something that felt like a full-circle prayer, I did it. I bought them peace. A $475,000 penthouse in Austin, the kind that looks across Lady Bird Lake the way a person looks across a finish line, astonished it's finally over. I imagined everything, the silver ribbon on the key box, the card I wrote with my neatest penmanship, for every time you gave me more than you had, and the way my father's shoulders might drop an inch when he understood he could stop carrying the world. I pictured my mother touching the kitchen countertop, not to clean it, but just to feel something she never thought would belong to her. The air in Austin was the kind of heat that makes the pavement shimmer. The balcony glass caught sunlight like a sheet of water. Even the elevator chime felt cinematic, ding, as if the building itself knew this was a scene we'd remember. But when the doors slid open, what I remember most is the way sound vanishes before it returns as a new shape. My mother sat with her face in her hands, the skin of her shoulders trembling. My father was outside on the terrace, shoes abandoned by the door, shaking as if the ground had a pulse. In the doorway between them stood Calder, my sister Sable's husband, wearing sunglasses indoors, his smile a straight line that only curved up when it cut someone. He nudged my father with the side of his foot, not a shove, not a strike, but a mean little kick that says more than a punch ever could. Sable leaned on the counter and watched the moment like a well-rehearsed scene. I had brought a gift. They had turned it into a weapon. There are lessons you shouldn't have to learn in a living room with a lake view. One of them is this: love doesn't always come with loyalty. Sometimes it arrives with leverage. Hours earlier, before the sick part of the story took center stage, there was a shimmer of happiness. We took pictures. We laughed in the awkward way people laugh when they've walked into a miracle and can't figure out how to stand. My father kept his old work jacket on, frayed at the cuffs, like taking it off would jinx the room. "This isn't for us," he whispered. "It is," I told him, and I meant every square foot. My mother wandered through the rooms, saying she'd like pale blue curtains, the color of breathing. For a while, the penthouse did exactly what it promised. It made us still. Then the elevator dinged. Sable arrived first, heels ticking across the tile like a metronome. "You really went all out, huh?" she said, setting down a gift bag no bigger than a grapefruit. Calder followed with that slow, approving glance men give things they plan to own. He took the wine my mother handed him, lifted the glass lazily, and said, "To family." It was a toast to possession, not to belonging. He moved through the room, tracing surfaces with his fingers the way people test fabric when they don't intend to buy it. I forced a laugh. "You know me," I said. "I don't do small." Sable's smile didn't reach her eyes. "No," she said. "You never have." Dinner was takeout plated on the good china because my father insisted that if he was going to sit in a place like this, he should act like it. We clinked glasses. We talked about a dog. We tried on the costume of a family that doesn't break good things when they get them. But when I stood to refill my glass, I heard two voices on the other side of the kitchen wall, and their syllables were smooth as paperwork. "If she really bought this, it'll be under their name anyway," Calder said, like he was talking about the weather. "We'll figure it out." Sable laughed, the low, confident sound I recognized from childhood, always a prelude to cruelty. "She'll hand it over," she said. "She always does. It's a strange thing to feel your lungs empty while you're still standing." I pressed my fingers to the counter because it felt like if I didn't, the floor might tilt. I went back to the table and I did what daughters do when their mother looks happy. For the first time in a long time, I swallowed my words and let the evening end on a soft note. Through the glass, I watched Calder twirl the keys around one finger, metal clicking the way small weapons click before a fight. I slept badly. Keys clinked in my dreams. Just after dawn, my phone lit up. Mom on the screen. Her voice came in pieces. "Eloin, I didn't know who else to call. Your father, he fell." Calder said it was a misunderstanding. In my experience, misunderstandings don't come with bruises. I drove with the steering wheel cold under my hands, even though the air was already thick with heat. The doorman half smiled like he wanted to warn me, but couldn't. I took the elevator up. When the doors opened, the home I had imagined became a terminal. Boxes stacked waist-high. Thick black marker, Redmond Kitchen, Redmond Toys, Redmond Master. A toy truck parked beside shoes I didn't recognize. The soft lemon and lavender my mother liked was replaced by a harsh spray that tried to mask something damp. The photo of my parents above the mantel was gone. In its place, a canvas of Sable and Calder and their kids beaming on a Florida beach, a family advertisement where my family used to be. My father was outside again, barefoot on the patio, arms wrapped around himself like weather. Inside, Calder sipped coffee from my father's faded navy mug with the cracked handle, lifted it as if toasting me. Sable chewed toast and called me dramatic. I ignored her and crouched beside my father. He didn't meet my eyes, but when I asked if he'd been pushed, his lip trembled and a bruise bloomed on his wrist, like a terrible flower. Back in the kitchen, a stack of papers waited like a spring-loaded trap. At first I thought, bills. Then I read the header, property title transfer. My parents' names typed neatly, Anal and Verity Keating, then crossed out in pen. Underneath, written with careful, familiar handwriting, Sable Redmond. "Mom," I said, holding the paper like it might cut, "did you sign this?" She stared at a chipped teacup and said what women say when fear has been weaponized against them. "He told me it was safer this way. He said you'd agree. He said it wouldn't change anything." Peace, she called it. You can call a lock by any name. It still closes the door. That night, I opened my laptop and watched the life I'd built turn into a ledger of omissions. Savings, drained. Investment, closed. Tax fund, gone. Each transfer aligned with calendar alerts I'd ignored and autopay emails I'd trashed because I thought there'd be time to deal with them later. There was an email from Calder with a subject line like a smirk. Family Matters. "You're welcome," it began. I made sure the property reflects reality now. There was a PDF attached with my name digitally scrawled beneath property transfer authorization. I felt a cold clarity. I had used that signature 2 years ago to help my mother renew her car insurance. I'd given Calder temporary access then and never revoked it. He'd lifted my signature like a graphic and pasted me into a transaction I didn't make. "Push this," he wrote, "and I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter you really are." The next morning, the building staff told me I was no longer on the access list. Restructuring, they said, which is a corporate word for theft when you can't prove it yet. Behind the tinted glass, I saw my father on the balcony, still as a statue. My mother turned away. At the desk, the doorman slid me a folded note without looking up. 4 words in rushed handwriting. "He knows your passwords." That night I made tea and let it go cold. I laid out the evidence like fragments under a microscope. Dates, signatures, fees paid from the family utilities account I'd opened years ago and stupidly left Calder authorized on. A notary entry that claimed electronic verification without a video record. It wasn't noise I needed. It was proof. I promised myself something that felt like a vow. I would not scream into the internet where narrative devours fact. I would walk into the quiet places where truth is filed, time-stamped, and stupidly, beautifully boring. The places people like Calder think no one checks. The places where justice doesn't trend, but it sticks. I didn't know. As I set my keys down and pressed my palm flat against the desk to stop it from shaking, that tomorrow a man with a quiet voice and a badge that said security would slide a small flash drive across a counter and change the angle of the whole story. I didn't know that this was bigger than a smug brother-in-law and a sister who liked the middle of every photograph. I only knew one thing, and I knew it with the kind of surety that steadies your breath. I gave them a home. They gave me a war. If peace had to be rebuilt from the rubble, I would build it myself, brick by careful brick, and I would start with the one thing they thought I wouldn't touch, the process they tried to outrun. The morning after I laid my life out like broken glass on a table, I did something that felt the opposite of dramatic. I went downstairs to the leasing office. Places like that don't trend. They timestamp. The lobby still held the faint smell of lemon cleaner and recirculated air. At the desk, a young man with sleepless eyes wore a badge that said Corbin. When I asked for a copy of the ownership transfer records, he blinked the way people do when a request is both simple and forbidden. "I think that's confidential," he said, shifting in his chair. "I'm the daughter," I said, keeping my voice low. "I gifted the property. Something's wrong. Please." There are moments when the hinge of a story is nothing but a small kindness, someone deciding that their conscience outranks their handbook. Corbin hesitated, glanced at the empty hallway behind me, then tapped a string of keys. He turned the monitor just enough. A digital scan bloomed on the screen, the deed, my mother's name where it should be, her signature where it should look real, because it was real, beneath a neat little witness box. Calder Redmond. My mouth went dry. Who notarized it? Corbin scrolled again, frowning. It says it was verified electronically, but there's no recorded video. No secondary sign-off. That's unusual. Unusual is a polite word for either lazy or crooked. I asked for a printout. His hand hovered over the printer for a second. Then he slid the warm pages across the desk, the way a person passes a match in a windstorm. "Don't say I gave it to you," he murmured. In the parking lot, heat shimmered above the asphalt like a mirage. But in my hands, I held process, dates, fields, the electronic notary entry that pretended to be airtight and forgot it needed oxygen. The line where Calder signed as witness felt like a fingerprint he'd left because he liked seeing his name in ink. Pride makes people sloppy. I pulled up the family utilities account from my phone, an account I had opened years ago to pay taxes and electric bills for my parents when things got tight. 2 years back, during a paperwork mess, I had added Calder under emergency authorization. I never removed him. I thought it was temporary the way people think a storm will end before it hits the roof. Now the ledger told the part of the story I had tried not to read. The title transfer fee, the service charges, the administrative costs, all paid from that account. My money, my authorization, weaponized by someone who learned exactly which doors I left unlocked. Back home, I opened my laptop like a person opening a door with a hand they know will be burned. Savings, thinned to the marrow. Investment, closed with tidy confirmations that felt like obituary clippings. Even the tax fund I'd set aside for the next quarter, drained. Each movement lined up neatly with calendar alerts I'd ignored and auto-pay emails I'd archived because the subject lines felt routine. Betrayal rarely knocks. It sends notifications you don't open. At dusk, someone knocked anyway. It was my father. He stood in the hallway, holding his cap in both hands, the way a man holds a secret he'd pay to forget. He looked older, as if every hour since the day of the keys had added itself to his face. I moved aside and let him in. The silence between us felt like an object, solid, heavy, difficult to carry without dropping. "I can't stay," he said. "He's keeping track." "Of you?" I asked. "Or of me?" He didn't answer. He stared at the window. "Don't come to the penthouse for a while," he said softly. "It's better if you let it go." Better for who? He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. When he opened them, they were the same eyes that taught me to look both ways before crossing, the same eyes that watched me fall off a bike and pretended not to see so I could stand up by myself. "Your mother's scared," he said. She didn't know what she was signing. "She knew fear," I said. He fed it to her in a china cup and called it peace. He flinched. I hated that. I hated that the person who taught me the difference between good and right was now standing in front of me, afraid of a man who thinks walls make him tall. My father put the cap back on his head as if the act could make him less visible. "You knew I wouldn't agree to this," I said, and my voice surprised me by not breaking. "You knew, and you let them say I would." He had no answer for the kind of truth that stands in a doorway and blocks the light. He touched the brim of his cap like a farewell and slipped out. the door closing with a sigh that sounded like apology. I didn't cry. Grief is a flood. This was a freeze. When I sat down again, my inbox pinged. From Calder Redmond. Subject, Family Matters. The email opened with the cruelty of a commercial jingle, smooth and smug. You're welcome. I made sure the property reflects reality now. You always wanted them taken care of, and they are, by us. No greeting, no pretense. Attached was a PDF stamped with tidy authority. I clicked. My name, my digital signature, beneath a header that said property transfer authorization. He had stolen my yes and fastened it to his theft. People think signatures are magic. They aren't. They're memory. I remembered exactly where that signature came from. A 2-year-old e-sign document I'd used to help my mother renew the family car insurance because the website wouldn't accept her login. Calder had access then. He had lifted the image of my signature the way you lift a color from a photo and pasted me into a crime. At the bottom of the email, he'd written one more line, polished like a threat you practice in a mirror. Push this, and I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter you really are. Everyone is a big word when you haven't done anything wrong. It sounds like a crowd holding stones. The next morning I drove to the building anyway. Habit is stubborn. The security guard stood when he saw me and asked for ID, even though he'd said my name a dozen times last week. He toggled a screen, looked up, and lowered his voice. I'm sorry. There was a change yesterday. The access list has been updated. You're not on it. Updated by who? He didn't answer, but the refusal was an answer. Over his shoulder, behind tinted glass, I saw my father's silhouette at the balcony door, still, small, not waving. My mother came into view for half a breath, then turned away. The guard cleared his throat. They told us everything is being recorded now, he said. Audio, video, even the lobby. He glanced to his left. The doorman, Maria, walked by without meeting my eyes and folded something into my hand the way you hand a tissue to a stranger who won't admit they're bleeding. In the car, I opened the note. 4 hurried words. He knows your passwords. I went home and made tea I didn't drink. I pulled the printouts from Corbin and set them beside the account records from my laptop. I drew a crude timeline in black pen. The night Calder and Sable had wandered the penthouse, touching edges and smiling at angles. The time-stamped scan of the deed. The electronic notary entry with no video. The authorization I had failed to revoke. The fees siphoned from the utilities fund. The email that read like Triumph wearing Charity's coat. People talk about connecting dots like it's a children's puzzle. It isn't. It's a forensic map of where trust ends and leverage begins. I thought about posting. A thread. A clarification. A plea to a public that doesn't know us. I drafted 3 sentences and deleted them all. Don't feed noise with noise, I told myself, though no one had yet told me those words. The internet rewards speed. Process rewards patience. Calder would play for the crowd. I would build a case for the clerk. Night fell quietly, the kind of thick Texas dark that makes the refrigerator hum sound like a secret. I clicked my lamp off and let the room be a room again. In the field of my phone's black screen, my face looked calmer than I felt. I set a reminder for morning. Title office. Management logs. HOA originals. The list steadied me. Where he had chosen spectacle, I would choose sequence. I didn't know what the next 24 hours would add to that sequence. How many hands would be caught on the curtain rope? How many footprints would glow when the lights came up? I only knew this. Someone inside that building had noticed the wrongness and wanted me to see it. Someone who understood that the difference between a story and a case is evidence. Before sleep came, thin and stubborn, a memory surfaced uninvited. The day I handed my father the keys, caught in the mirror behind him. Calder's expression wasn't joy, it was calculation. You don't lose a home in a day. You lose it in the seconds you ignore because they're small. I turned the lamp back on and wrote one last line at the bottom of my page. No more small seconds. In the morning, I'd walk back into the quiet places, the title office, the HOA binder, the mirror-cool hallways where cameras don't blink unless asked. And I would keep putting paper beside paper until the shape of their lie could no longer pass as truth. And if the building had ears, and I had reason to believe it did, then the building also had eyes, and somewhere, someone had captured what leverage looks like, before it calls itself love. I didn't know his name yet. I'd learn it soon enough, spoken in a low voice over a coffee shop table, along with a small flash drive that would tilt the whole frame. For now, I closed the folder, set my keys on top, and let the silence hold. The day the story tilted, it didn't happen in a courtroom or on a feed. It happened at a cafe by the lake, where the air smelled like roasted beans and wet wood, the place my parents liked on Sundays when money was measured in small joys. I sat with a cup I didn't drink, fingers wrapped around heat like a lifeline. He arrived late, the kind of late that says he watched the room twice before walking in. Uniform swapped for street clothes, posture still straight, voice pitched soft. Hale Whitlow, head of building security. We'd traded polite hellos in the lobby over the weeks after the keys, but never words with weight. You shouldn't have gotten that call, he said without preamble, eyes flicking to the window and back. It took me a second to understand what he meant. The voice, older, colder, that had warned me off my own family. But I guess it means you're getting close. Close to what? I kept my tone even. People push harder when they think you're fragile. To what Calder's really doing. Hale slid a small flash drive across the table like it was contraband. You didn't get this from me. What is it? I didn't touch it yet. Footage, he said. 3 nights before your father's birthday. He brought in boxes after hours. Logged them as financial archives to bypass standard delivery restrictions. A pause. Those archives aren't supposed to exist. The drive was warm in my palm, warmer than plastic had any right to be. Why help me? I asked. Hale glanced down at empty space, like a memory was sitting there. When the company cut my hours last year, your father came to talk to management. Said my kid needed stability more than a spreadsheet needed savings. They bumped me back to full time. He lifted one shoulder. I owe him. The debt I didn't know my father carried for someone else pressed against my ribs from the inside. Goodness leaves a paper trail too. It just doesn't get notarized. Be careful who you trust. Ms. Keating, he added, standing. Calder isn't working alone. Alone. The word felt ridiculous now, like calling a storm a breeze because only one branch snapped in your yard. I drove home with the flash drive burning the skin of my hand and plugged it in before my front door clicked shut. A grid of muted camera feeds appeared, each with tidy timestamps. I clicked the one Hale had mentioned. The hallway outside the loading bay glowed a sick, blue-white, only fluorescent lighting can learn. 3 days before Dad's birthday, 0118. The camera caught Calder backing a dolly through the door, stacked with bankers' boxes labeled in thick black marker, Keating Holdings. Keating spelled wrong. My name, our name, bent to fit on a box that shouldn't exist. He wasn't supposed to have access to anything with a legal echo of our family on it. He looked around like a man who expects to be applauded for being careful. Behind him, Sable held the next box, laughing at something he whispered. She was wearing a sweatshirt with the hood up, performative invisibility. Together they built a little wall of white cardboard and whispered while the night let them. I scrubbed through the footage frame by frame, pausing at the clipboard Calder lifted as if to show it off to a camera he assumed wasn't watched. The delivery notation read like a lie that knew it wouldn't be checked. Financial archives, tenant records. Tenant. My parents weren't tenants. They were supposed to be home. I copied the file to 3 locations, labeled each with date and camera ID. Not because I'm paranoid, because he is. By afternoon, the apartment felt too small to hold my breathing, so I did what I'd avoided since the day the boxes appeared. I went back to the penthouse to see my mother. The security guard saw my face, didn't quite see my name, and let me pass on a wave of mercy. When my mother opened the door, she looked like a person who had been losing sleep in pieces, little squares torn from the middle of the night. She pulled me into the foyer and pressed a finger to her lips. No hi, no you look thin, just a whisper scraped raw. You shouldn't be here, she said. He'll be back soon. I don't care, I said, before my better sense could grab my sleeve. Why did you sign those papers? Her hands trembled on the edge of the counter. The chipped teacup was there, hairline crack catching light. He said if I didn't, he'd take your father somewhere else, she whispered. That we'd move away from you. That it would be easier for everyone. She swallowed. I'm so tired, Eloin. I wanted peace. You gave him everything for the word peace, I said, and heard how sharp it came out. She flinched. The part of me that wanted to hold her and the part that wanted to shake the house until lies fell out stepped into the same body and argued silently. I don't know what to do, she said. The confession deflated something I'd been inflating with anger. Fear isn't the absence of intelligence. It's the presence of a threat. She took a breath that looked, for a second, like it might steady her. There's something at the old house, she said. Your father's study? Under the Bible. She glanced at the door. Don't come back here until you find it. The elevator dinged. My mother's face drained of color. Go, she whispered. Umpre, please. The stairwell swallowed me in concrete and breath. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed a palm to my chest. The old house hadn't been ours for months, but the key on my ring still worked. Grass in the front yard had gone to seed. The blinds were crooked. Air inside tasted like dust and memory. I went straight to my father's study, pulled the desk chair out with a squeal of wood on wood that felt indecent, and lifted the Bible, its black cover cracked at the spine. Tucked into the back, exactly where she'd said, was an old manila folder. Inside, photocopies of property deeds dated months before I purchased the penthouse, paper that said the thing Calder had been staging was never the thing itself, and a letter, ink a little feathered, in my father's careful script, "If something happens, trust Lana Karile. She'll know what to do." I sat back in the old leather chair that remembered him better than I did. Lana, the family attorney who had left our firm a couple of years ago to care for her husband through chemo. Smart like a scalpel, patient like someone who gardens. I hadn't spoken to her since she brought soup over that winter my mother had the flu. The house creaked like it remembered arguments and lullabies both. In the kitchen sink, a china cup with faded blue flowers lay in 2 pieces, crack running straight through the handle. I pressed the edges together with my thumbs and imagined epoxy and time. Not erasing the fracture, honoring it. A kintsugi no one would see but us. I dialed Lana from the study because I couldn't stand in the kitchen without thinking about the day my mother taught me to make tea and call it comfort. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been expecting me and was only pretending she hadn't. "Show me," she said after I told her the short version. It wasn't a question. It was an address. Her office downtown was glass and hush, the kind of place where silence smells like polished wood and consequence. I sat across from her while she read everything without once looking at me to perform empathy. Her fingers didn't shake. Page by page, she drew a map only she could see. When she finally spoke, it wasn't triumph. It was something steadier. "He filed optics," she said, tapping the electronic notary entry. "Not process." The original trust, she lifted one of the photocopies from the manila folder, still recognizes you as guardian and owner. The HOA edits, cosmetic, never filed at the city. She placed the papers down in a neat stack, aligning edges like a judge. "It only works if no one checks." My lungs remembered how to do their job in long sentences. "So we undo it?" She shook her head, small and precise. "No, we let him overplay. Men like Calder don't just want to win. They want to be seen winning. That's where they step wrong." She slid me a legal pad. "From now on, everything is a record. Time, date, device. You will not argue online. You will not comment. We will build a case while he builds a narrative." I thought of the lobby note, "He knows your passwords," of Hale's flash drive, of Maria's eyes not meeting mine, of the keys clicking like a promise only I'd heard. I nodded. "Tomorrow," Lana said, already assembling a quiet war on her desk, "we'll request original filings from title and HOA, and we'll audit the access logs. If he moved boxes at 118 M. Someone signed off. People rarely commit fraud without company." "Company," I repeated, and saw, not for the first time, my sister in a hallway camera feed, laughing as she lifted a box that didn't belong to her. On the table between us, the manila folder looked unremarkable, flimsier than everything it contained. I put my hand on it the way you touch a shoulder before you say, "I'm here." Outside, the skyline sharpened against late light. Inside, the law took a shape and met my rage halfway. When I left Lana's office, I didn't feel victorious. I felt oriented. There's a difference. Winning is a headline. Orientation is a compass you can keep when the lights cut out. I walked to my car and sat for a long minute with the engine off, city heat turning the cabin into a lesson about how air can carry weight. Then I wrote 3 words in my notebook, beneath the line where I'd promised myself no more small seconds. We check everything. The rest would come later, the sting, the recording, the reversal. For now, I drove home with a folder on the passenger seat and the sense that the floor under my feet had stopped tilting. Not because the war was over, but because I finally knew where to stand. Lana didn't give me a pep talk. She gave me a plan. We would perform smallness so that arrogance would perform loudly back. "You'll go in soft," she said, her eyes flat with purpose. "He has to believe you're done fighting." Men like Calder brag to the mirror when they think the audience is asleep. I went home and practiced the smallest version of myself, the way my shoulders curve when I'm carrying apology, the voice I used when I was 12 and thought being agreeable was kindness. I tied my hair back the way my mother likes it when she wants to pretend the world is orderly. I slid my phone into my purse and opened the voice recorder. It waited there, screen dark, like a lens that listens. I knocked on the door to the Penthouse the following afternoon. No appointment, no preamble, no storm at my back, just a white flag folded into my expression. Calder opened it with a smirk that belonged to a man who had already cast himself as Victor in the documentary playing in his head. He leaned one arm on the frame as if he were the frame. "Didn't expect you so soon," he said. "I came to make peace," I replied, lifting the corners of my mouth like a person who doesn't quite know how to smile. He stepped aside. The living room had shifted half an inch toward a showroom since the last time I was there. A new marble coffee table squatted between 2 gray chairs. A large abstract painting took the place of anything that had ever meant something. Sable stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, watching me as if she could keep me small by squinting. "Tea?" Calder asked, light as lint. Before I could say yes, Sable said, "Mother swears it calms nerves." Her tone folded the word mother into something breakable. "Tea would be nice," I said. I placed my phone gently on the coffee table beside the marble tray where the keys lay polished and posed. The screen was black. They didn't look twice. Calder returned with a cup. I didn't drink from it. I set it down carefully as he settled across from me, ankle on knee, the pose of a landlord in an old movie. "You know," he began, "the way men begin when they've practiced their sermons. Peace comes at a cost. You gave them the house. Next time, read the fine print." He wanted me to flinch. I decided to blink instead. "Maybe I will," I said softly. Sable tilted her head like a hawk considering a field mouse, and when I didn't scurry, She looked briefly annoyed. I let the conversation blur at the edges. He boasted in small nibbles, not bites. He mentioned restructuring like he was talking about a spreadsheet and not my parents' lives, referenced the reality of ownership in a tone that made truth sound like a brand. I nodded at the right places and made the kind of sounds women make when they've been trained to pad men's sentences. He thought he was narrating a lesson for me. The recorder heard his lesson for a judge. Even while I kept my body arranged as apology, my eyes inventoried the room. A new router blinked beneath the TV, small green lights pricking a pattern into the dark, surveillance tucked into decor. The luxury watch on Calder's wrist, a face I knew he couldn't have purchased last year without selling something else first. The family photo over the mantel had been replaced by a portrait of Sable's son by the pool. A little boy posed where decades of our parents' anniversaries should have lived. At the back door, where my father's house slippers used to rest, there was a narrow shadow and nothing else. It's strange what absence looks like when you've run out of synonyms for grief. When I stood to leave, Calder did not escort me. Sable did not say goodbye. In the hall mirror, just for a second, my mother's face flashed, a pale oval in the background. Her lips moved around 2 words I'd already learned by heart. Be careful. Down in my car, I plugged the phone into the charger and sent the audio to Lana with a subject line that didn't try to be brave. From today. Her reply came back so fast the screen pulsed. Got it. We're in motion. That night, sleep arrived like a thief and left like one, taking what little rest I had rebuilt. At sunrise, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First, it trembled, unimportant and insistent. Then it lit in a steady strobe. Texts, calls, a flood of notifications that didn't care about context. I blinked into the glare and saw my name on an Austin gossip forum, on neighborhood Facebook groups, on a local radio show's page where the comments section mistook itself for a courtroom. The headline was a blade honed to a rumor's edge. Daughter scams elderly parents out of their home. Beneath it was a perfect picture, me, smiling, handing my father the keybox, frozen in the frame that had once felt like a miracle. The caption did the rest. She promised her dad peace, then kicked him out a week later. The images kept coming, curated like a museum of malice. Me entering the building. Me leaving, blurry enough to look sneaky. My mother on the balcony, hands to her face, someone's long-lens compassion capturing her at her thinnest angle. In every photograph, Calder was positioned as the man you trust with a lock. I tried my parents' phones. My father went to voicemail. My mother's rang, then stopped. A text from Sable arrived instead. You brought this on yourself. Maybe next time think before humiliating the family. Humiliation. The word did not land like fire. It landed like ice. Cold has a way of sharpening edges. A client emailed to pause our project until I could clear things up. I typed 3 drafts that sounded like someone drowning politely and deleted them all. My hands finally went still on the keyboard. I called Lana. Don't post, she said before I could speak. Not one word. They want you loud so they can call you unstable. Noise is their game. Ours is paper. They used photos from inside the building, I said. Someone's feeding them. Maria's under pressure, Lana answered, not guessing so much as placing a likely piece on the board. He's paying for silence or for signal. Either way, it's a short lease. We stay the course. We document. We let the record burn the narrative, not the other way around. After we hung up, my apartment felt like a set. After the crew has left, everything there, nothing alive. I pulled Hale's flash drive from the drawer and opened the hallway footage again, watching Calder steer those boxes through the door at 1:18 im. The labels loud as sirens to anyone who could read. Keating Holdings. Wrong spelling. Wrong claim. Wrong night. I saved stills, watermarked timestamps, mirrored backups. I checked the e-notary entry on the transfer. Again, no video, no secondary sign-off. I lined it next to the deed copy where Calder had signed witness, a vanity that might yet pay dividends. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw two men in suits with smiles that had never learned how to touch eyes. Ms. Keating? The taller one said when I opened the door. We represent Mr. Redmond. He's authorized us to offer a settlement if you agree to walk away quietly. You'll retain a portion of the trust, generous considering the circumstances. Considering the circumstances, I repeated, so they could hear how foolish the phrase sounded when the circumstances involved theft and humiliation. If you pursue this publicly, he let the sentence hang like a chandelier in a cheap hotel. I put them on speaker and set the phone on the hall table. You're on record, I said. All communication goes to my counsel. The shorter one tensed, as if the word counsel were a trick. Otherwise, I continued, we can discuss your client's forgery, harassment, and the city's interest in e-notary fraud. They looked at each other, then at their shoes, then back at the hall in a rehearsal of retreat. Now we'll be in touch, the tall one said, and they left, their footsteps too quick for men who believed they were winning. I texted Lana what had just happened. She sent back a single line and a small, cold smile in emoji. They blinked first. That evening I walked 2 blocks past the Penthouse and stood under a tree across the street where leaves made a filigree against the lit windows. Inside, Sable laughed and lifted a glass. Calder posed with his hand hooked at his belt loop, keys hanging like a prize, won at a fair game where the rules were rigged. My mother sat at the table with her shoulders bowed, pressing her fingers to her face. My father was nowhere. There is a particular kind of prayer that isn't words. It's the refusal to look away. I went home to my quiet apartment, which hadn't changed and yet felt changed because I had. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't click refresh on the comments that mistook volume for verdict. I sat at the kitchen table where Morning Sun used to find my tea, and I planned. I imagined paperwork stacked on a clerk's desk, ink drying on process that never asks to be thanked. I imagined a room where a city officer listened to a voice memo of a man saying read the fine print and decided to read the law instead. Near midnight, I opened my laptop one last time. Calder had posted a new picture, standing by the front door, keys between his fingers like a rosary. The caption read, "Finally home." In the background, on the entry table, I saw my mother's teacup. It had been glued back together badly, cracks bright as lightning in porcelain. I closed the screen and saw my face reflected there, small and steady. The cup wasn't pretty. It didn't need to be. It was standing. The thing about a smear is that it doesn't have to be believable, it just has to be loud. The thing about a case is that it doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be true. Lana kept me on the second road, the one that looks boring until the end when the pavement turns to gavel. We stay in sequence, she said, and the words steadied me. Sequence is a language men like Calder forget to study, because applause doesn't require grammar. That morning we started with the title office. Sequoia, a clerk in a cardigan, took our request without asking for a story. That's what I liked about her. She had stamps, not opinions. Lana asked for original filings, deed record, trust instrument, HOA amendments, any notary attachments. We sat in orange vinyl chairs, while a printer in the back produced thin proof of things that shouldn't need proving. When the clerk returned, Lana did what she does. She read like an X-ray. 2 pages in, she lifted a finger. Here, she said, and even her here sounded like an exhibit sticker. Trust is intact. Guardian status, you. Title, you. No recorded transfer at the county. She slid the HOA packet next to it and smoothed the top sheet with the flat of her hand. Though their edits exist only in the building's binder. Cosmetic? Process beats optics. I looked up at the ceiling to keep my eyes from stinging. Weeks of humiliation, of neighbors squinting like they'd heard a better version of me, flipped by a date stamp and a rule about where forms must live to matter. So we're done? I asked, and hated the hope in my voice. We're oriented, she corrected gently. Now we close the loop. She had me sign requests for access logs, a formal demand for the e-notary's verification record, and a preservation notice to the building's management about camera footage and visitor sign-ins. Paper tells on itself, she murmured. You just have to give it a chance. When we stepped out into the Austin heat, I felt that rare thing, relief without the lie of finality. We weren't safe. We were not yet home. But the ground under my feet had stopped pretending to be air. Back at my apartment, I opened photos on my phone looking for something. I didn't know what until I saw it. The picture from the day of the keys, my father smiling like he'd been handed a sunrise, and in the mirror behind him, Calder's mouth, not the curve of gratitude, but the tilt of a man measuring a room. Premeditation is a posture if you know where to look. I sent the photo to Lana with a timestamp and a note. Reflection shows he was all ready. She replied, We don't argue motives. We prove moves. She was right. We needed what moved. Hale texted later with a single line that made the skin between my shoulder blades go tight. Can I give a statement? A statement is different than a tip. It stands up in places with seals on the wall. I met him at the same cafe by the lake. He arrived with a notebook and the look of a man who had made peace with the risk. Over 2 untouched coffees, he recounted the night deliveries, the labels, the way Calder used financial archives as a passcode to bypass the freight log. He described a conversation he overheard about tightening access and controlling narrative, the phrases slipping from Calder's mouth, like he'd been practicing in front of a dark window. Hale was careful. He didn't guess. He didn't add color where the camera had already painted in grayscale. He signed his affidavit with a firm period. "Your father kept my schedule whole," he said, pen still in hand. "Feels right to keep the record whole for him." When I got home, Maria was waiting by the curb, arms folded around, a paper bag as if lunch could double as courage. She didn't look at me. She looked at the tree over my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words came out as if she'd swallowed glass. "He said he'd help with my mother's surgery if I kept him informed." I wanted to hate her. Instead, I heard the exact price of a body being desperate. "The surgery?" I asked. She nodded. "Paid. But he wants more. He wants recordings." She pressed a thumb drive into my palm. I started making copies of the lobby feeds, the access list changes. I thought maybe one day I would need to be able to say, "I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad person." "You aren't," I said, and for once I didn't sound like I was trying to convince anyone. People do ugly math when they're cornered. The person who corners them doesn't get to call it charity. Lana took Hale's affidavit, Maria's thumb drive, the title records, the HOA originals, the e-notary gap, my audio of Calder's sermon about fine print, the photo with the mirror smile, and she laid them out like a map someone could drive without getting lost. "We're almost there," she said. "But we're going to let him step one more time." Pride needs a stage. As if on cue, 2 men in better suits arrived at Lana's office the next morning, wearing the expression of people who believed consent could be purchased like office furniture. They offered a generous portion of the trust if I would sign an NDA and de-escalate the narrative. Lana listened the way a surgeon listens to a relative explain a YouTube cure. Then she asked the taller one whether he planned to include the e-notary irregularities, the unfiled HOA amendments, and the recorded coercion in his draft. The men blinked in the synchronized way of people who just heard a language they don't speak. "We'll need to confer," the short one said, and they retreated, their shoes scuffing dignity off the hallway. "Blinked first," Lana said, not triumphantly, just fact. "Now we file notice with the city and walk in with process." She looked up at me. "I want you there." "Why?" I asked. "You can serve him without me." "Because he didn't just stage a theft," she said. "He staged a humiliation." "You're the witness he didn't invite, who still has the right to sit in the front row." The smear machine didn't slow just because the law had entered the chat. A new post hit a forum with anonymous sources, claiming I had forced my parents to sign documents they didn't understand. The irony made my throat taste like tin. I didn't respond. The comments stacked like a cheap wall. Strangers found new ways to spell monster. I closed the window and mended a crack in the blue flower teacup with a thin line of epoxy. The seam stayed visible, silvering in the light. Some things are more honest, broken, and repaired than they ever were pretending to be whole. That night I dreamed of keys again, only this time they weren't clinking from Calder's finger. They were resting flat on a table, silent, like metal that had remembered it was an object, not a weapon. When I woke, the quiet in my apartment had weight and shape. Fear had stopped being fog. It was a door with a handle I could see. I got dressed like a person going to work, not to war, and met Lana in the lobby of the building I had once bought as a prayer. We didn't wait for permission. We didn't perform fury. Lana carried a folder with the city seal visible at the corner. I carried nothing but my name. The elevator ride was short and long, as all elevator rides are when you know the scene you're entering will try to make you feel small. When the door opened, I smelled the same expensive candle. Sable liked to light when she wanted to pretend refinement came in jars. Calder opened the penthouse door with that practiced smirk, the one he probably thought was his best feature. "You just can't quit," he said. "You're right," I answered, and the steadiness in my voice surprised us both. "Because this was never yours to begin with." Behind me, a city officer stepped into view, and Calder's smirk faltered 0.5 millimeter. Lana handed over the notice that reasserted the trust, the title, the chain of custody on the recordings, the gaps in the e-notary log. "Effective immediately," she said, crisp as paper. "The property reverts to Ms. Keating as the rightful trust holder." I watched the words hit his face and fail to stick. Sable stood frozen by the mantel where our family used to live in frames. My mother was at the table, fingers around a cup she wasn't drinking. The cup slipped and shattered, porcelain skidding across marble like little truths finding edges. Calder laughed, too loud, too late. "You think a stamp changes reality?" He snapped. "You think this," he waved the notice, "means you own this place? You think you own this family?" I let the silence do what it does to men who perform. Then I reached into my pocket, opened my phone, and tapped a file whose waveform I knew by heart. His voice filled the room. "Peace comes at a cost. Next time, read the fine print." The officer's pen stopped mid-tap. Lana placed a labeled copy of the audio on the entry table next to the keys, chain of custody already logged. Sable's mouth opened and closed without sound. My mother stood trembling. And then my father stepped from the hallway, thinner, yes, but standing. He didn't look at Calder. He looked at me. "Enough," he said, "and if you've ever heard a gentle man say a hard word, you know how a room obeys." We didn't gloat. Lana didn't smirk. The officer didn't threaten. Process doesn't need to. It simply arrives, sits down, and stays. I walked to the table and saw the keys lying there, waiting for a performance they weren't going to get from me. I didn't lift them. I didn't shake them. I didn't crown myself with metal. I placed my palm flat beside them until the tremor in my hand stilled. "This is a closing," I said softly, to no one and to everyone. We left without slamming the door. The hallway light turned everything gold, the way late light forgives even ugly paint. Lana touched my shoulder once in the elevator. Not comfort, not victory, just contact. "We're not done," she said. But we're almost at the turn. On the ride down, I thought about the Bible under which my father had tucked truth, months before any of us knew what would be required of it. I thought about the teacup, glued and gleaming at the cracks. I thought about how narrative feeds on noise and how law grows in quiet. Outside, the heat met us like a wall and then like air because we kept walking. The next move would not be a post. It would be a filing. It would not be a scream. It would be a sentence with a date at the top and a signature at the bottom, the kind that sticks when rumor slides off. Lana glanced at me as we crossed the lobby. "Ready?" she asked. I realized I was. Not for a fight. For an ending that had finally remembered to be honest. The hallway held its breath after the door clicked shut behind us, as if even the building needed a beat to relearn the sound of ordinary air. Lana and the city officer walked 2 steps ahead, their silhouettes clean against the elevator's brushed steel. "We follow through," she said, an answer to a question I hadn't had the breath to ask. "Faites sur. Follow through," I thought, the unglamorous mercy at the end of a long cruelty. By noon, filings had multiplied with the cool logic of process. Lana lodged the preservation order for every relevant camera feed and submitted Hale's sworn statement with the municipal complaint on e-notary irregularities. She attached Maria's copied logs as an addendum, access list changes, late-night entries, the financial archives ruse. She didn't underline, she stacked. Every page with a date, every date with a source, every source with a hand that could be called to testify. It was choreography for paper, and at the end of it, the shape looked like truth. The smear machine tried to keep pace with its own noise. A neighborhood form posted that I had stormed in with goons. A comment below claimed my lawyer friend had faked seals. I didn't correct them. The city emailed a case number. The title office responded with confirmation that no transfer existed in the county record. The HOA board chair, a man who loved meetings like some people love golf, sent a clipped note acknowledging out-of-binder edits Calder had attempted. "Out of binder," Lana repeated, unamused. "We'll translate that to not recognized." She CC'd the board and the property manager on a formal notice. All internal amendments null where not filed with the city. Access restored to the recorded trust holder. Staff instructed to halt any direction from unrecorded parties. Paper spoke the dialect bullies hate, indifference. Late afternoon slid over Austin like warm glass. I drove to my parents' old house because my body asked for a room that remembered us as a family before skylines and signatures got in the way. The grass still needed cutting. The kitchen still smelled like dust and dish soap. I rinsed the blue flower cup I'd glued the night before. The seam gleamed in the light that angled through the window. My mother always said Jasmine took better to morning sun, and I realized I'd been saving a pot for a day that didn't need me to be brave, just present. The phone buzzed in my back pocket. "Lana." He blinked again, she said. Calder's attorneys had emailed a proposed resolution that read like someone practicing contrition without knowing any of the words. They wanted non-disparagement provisions that would have gagged me while they kept whispering. They offered a portion of the trust in recognition of familial bonds. Lana drafted a reply in the grammar of consequence, withdrawal of false notices, written acknowledgement of misrepresentation, return of any funds moved from the utilities account, and a consent decree installing audit oversight for the building's access system. "We make this about systems as much as about men," she said. "Because he is not the only one who will try this." The next day, the city officer called to schedule a statement. "We'll need the original audio file metadata," he said, "and the phone's chain of custody since the recording." Lana already had a labeled drive ready. "Thank you," he added, voice careful, neutral. "Do not engage online." We weren't. The narrative engine finally coughed. The same form that had crowned me villain now posted a community update saying the title had never changed at the county level and that questions remained about electronic verification. The comments bent like grass in a wind they hadn't predicted. Not apologies, not yet. But room. Sometimes that's the only apology a crowd knows how to make. The day after the notice, we returned to the penthouse, but not to perform triumph. A locksmith met us in the lobby with a work order the building had no choice but to honor. The old key set, mine, matched the reasserted trust. The access list reflected it. The doorman looked at me the way people look at someone they briefly believed and now wish they hadn't. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Hale stood at the back of the lobby, not in uniform, not entirely comfortable with being seen on my side. Our eyes met, and we gave each other the smallest nod two people can exchange and still call it gratitude. Inside the penthouse, the air felt different, like a stage without an audience. Sable was there, arms around herself for once. Her mouth started a sentence and abandoned it halfway. Calder carried himself like a man who thought scorn could still retroactively change a ruling. Lana's voice remained even. "You've received the notices," she said. "You are not to alter, remove, or destroy any property or records. You will surrender fobs and keys." She reached into her folder and set a copy of the order on the marble island, the seal winking up at us like a second sun. Any further interference becomes contempt. "Contempt," Calder repeated, trying on the word as if it were a cologne he might someday afford. "You think a piece of paper will feed them? We'll fix her." He nodded at my mother. My mother didn't look at him. "Pieces of paper paid your watch," I said, and his jaw ticked, but he didn't answer. My father stood in the hallway again, a little thinner than the man from the photo, but not reduced. He handed me a folded square of yellowed stationery, the one he had once intended me to find only if. "I should have told you sooner," he said, voice scratched by too many swallowed sentences. "Fear talks loud when it's hungry." "So does pride," I said. We were both right, and the room knew it. I could have kept the penthouse. It was mine again, not by drama, but by date. The balcony still framed the lake like a promise you could walk into. The marble still cooled my palm the way expensive things do. But as we stood there, the shape of my piece came clear, and it wasn't a view. "I'm selling," I told Lana, as we stepped back into the hall. Not out of spite, out of proportion. She studied my face a second, and then nodded. "Then we'll sell clean." The listing moved quickly. Process had ironed the wrinkles flat. When the sale closed, the wire hit like quiet rain, not a drum roll. I didn't buy a different skyline. I sat at my very small desk and signed papers for something I wanted more than a glass box in the sky, a foundation that could do for strangers what I couldn't quite do for my own family in time. We called it the Quiet Line Fund, for women rebuilding after familial betrayal, legal consults, emergency housing deposits, locks changed when peace has been weaponized against them, digital hygiene audits for those whose passwords have become someone else's leverage. You turned pain into purpose, Lana said when the 501c3 letter arrived. No, I said. I turned survival into structure. It felt truer. It felt like something that might last longer than outrage. My parents moved into a one-story house on the edge of town, the kind with a square of backyard that could hold tomatoes and a small bench. My father planted the seedlings like prayer beads. My mother took out the watercolors she'd stored since I was 12 and set them by the kitchen window. They started seeing a counselor, someone with a degree on the wall and tissues in every room. She's talking, my father said one afternoon beneath the branches of an old live oak in the park. He leaned heavier on the black cane he'd finally agreed to use. About the house? I asked. He shook his head. About silence. We walked slowly, our elbows linked. Across the path, a child's kite dipped and recovered. The wind took the tail and then returned it. I thought of every moment I had swallowed to preserve a false peace. Silence didn't keep us together, I said. It kept us obedient. He nodded, eyes going bright and then steady again. You broke it, he said. The cycle. We broke it, I corrected, because truth can be kind when it wants to be. That night, a message arrived from a number I knew too well. Sable. I didn't know what he was capable of. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time. The apology wasn't wrong. It just wasn't enough. I typed and erased, typed and erased. In the end, I blocked the number, not to punish, but to mark the edge where my responsibility ended. Media did what media does, moved on when a newer fire burned brighter. A small local piece ran 2 weeks later, the headline anemic but accurate. Ownership dispute resolved, no transfer recorded. There was no vindication parade, no mass apology. That's all right. Paper had done what it was built to do, and the rest belonged to lives, not feeds. When I unlocked my new apartment, a second-floor walk-up with stubborn windows and morning light that found the table without being asked, I set 2 things on the shelf, a small wooden box with keys I didn't plan to use again, and the blue flower teacup, its cracks bright as veins. They were not trophies. They were exhibits that didn't need a judge anymore. On Sunday, I called my parents. We talked about mint and basil, about the way watercolor behaves on different paper, about a counselor's metaphor for fear that made my mother laugh in that surprised way that sounds like a hallway light turning on. We didn't mention the penthouse. We didn't need to. When I hung up, I felt the quiet arrive the way a lake holds a breeze. No spectacle, just acceptance. Lana texted a final docket number and a period. It looked, somehow, like a benediction. I turned the cup so its mended seam faced the window and watched the line catch light. There are kinds of peace that require repair to prove they're real. I had spent a year learning the difference between owning a view and owning my life. I preferred the second. On the first morning, I didn't wake to dread. The light found my kitchen table, like it remembered a promise I'd forgotten to keep. The apartment was small enough that footsteps didn't echo and honest enough that silence felt like company, not judgment. I made tea and set the blue flower cup by the window so the mended seam could catch the sun. It gleamed, a silver line where break became bond, and I thought, maybe peace isn't the absence of cracks. Maybe it's the willingness to hold them in daylight. Life didn't resume with a fanfare. It resumed with chores. I took the trash out, watered the basil in a chipped pot, answered 2 emails from clients who had waited for the storm to name itself and then drift away. I wrote invoices and folded laundry, and when a headline tried to call me back into the noise, I let it ring. Survival had become structure, and structure, for the first time in too long, felt like a home I owned from the inside. My parents called at noon because Sunday was still Sunday, even after everything had been renamed. My father asked if I'd seen the tomatoes. They were stubborn but promising. My mother told me her counselor used a phrase she liked, earned quiet, and she'd been turning it over like a smooth stone in her pocket. We did not speak about the penthouse. We spoke about mint bolting in the heat, whether watercolor behaves better on cold press or hot press, old hymns my father still hummed when he forgot there was someone listening. I held the phone between my ear and my shoulder and looked at the keys in their wooden box on the shelf, a museum label I didn't need to read anymore. I'd believed for too long that the right room could fix a family. Now I understood that rooms only hold what we carry into them. You can buy a view, you have to make a life. In the afternoon, I took the bus to the old house, not because I needed anything there, but because grief deserves to see the places it has tried so hard to haunt. Grass brushed my knees on the front walk. The porch held the same tilt it held when I was 8, and convinced I could straighten the world with a broom. Inside, dust motes performed their slow theater, and the study smelled faintly of paper and time. I set the family Bible back in the desk drawer where my father had hidden the folder months earlier, a small ceremony that said, "You did your job, rest now." The house didn't answer, which is how houses say amen. On the way back, I stopped by the lake. People were doing what people do when they aren't being watched, laughing too loud, sharing fries, throwing a ball badly and without apology. A little girl in a yellow dress studied a dragonfly like it was a physics problem. I thought about the day I handed my father the keys and how in the mirror behind him there had been a different story already in rehearsal. I thought about Hale's quiet courage and Maria's confession handed over like contraband, and Lana's steel disguised as calm, and the city officer's careful questions that turned audio into evidence instead of spectacle. I thought about my mother's hands trembling around a cup she didn't drink from, and the way her voice found its way back to herself sentence by sentence. I thought about my sister's message and the particular mercy it takes to respond with nothing at all. If you're expecting a grand morale, here is the smallest one I know and the truest. Love is not proof of safety, and silence is not proof of peace. The people who tell you to calm down sometimes mean, give me more time to harm you in a way no one can see. The people who tell you that family comes first sometimes mean, my comfort comes ahead of your sanity. The remedy is not rage, it's record. Not shouting, showing. Process doesn't hug you and it won't tuck you in, but it will stand beside you when a room full of rumor pretends to be a jury. Paper is not romantic and never will be, but it remembers. So yes, I sold the penthouse. Not as a punishment to anyone, but as a proportion to myself. It had been built from the wrong prayer. In its place, we built the Quiet Line Fund. The first grant went out last week, first month's rent for a woman who left a house where peace had been defined as obeying a man's temper. The second paid for consult hours, so another woman could understand what her name still meant on a deed a cousin swore wasn't hers. A third covered a digital hygiene audit for a mother whose passwords had become a leash. We are small. There are bigger fires. But a quiet line is exactly that, a number you can call to hear, you are not crazy. And here is the next piece of paper. Sometimes the opposite of abandonment is paperwork. At dusk, I walked home past a row of windows where other people's dinners were being set down, steam curling into lamplight. I checked my door twice out of habit, and then only once, and that felt like a kind of graduation. On my table waited a list Lana had sent, a final docket number, a closed complaint, a stamped acknowledgement from the title office. The stack wasn't thick, but it outweighed the months that had tried to tell me I was a rumor anyone could edit. I slid the papers into a folder and wrote one word on the tab in black pen, Keating. I didn't underline it. It didn't need help. Later, I took the cup from the window and poured hot water over a tea bag that advertised comfort with the accuracy of a pamphlet. The first sip was bitter. The second was better. I stood there with both hands around heat and asked myself what I would tell you if you were sitting across this small table, your life strewn like receipts you don't want to read, your good name being bargained by strangers in a comment section that will forget you by Tuesday. I would say, gather your papers, find a Lana or become one. Speak only when it builds the record. Don't let anyone turn your kindness into an authorization. If your passwords have been compromised, change them like you would the locks on a door. If your mother calls what hurts her peace, help her name it something else. If the crowd points at you and roars, label your files and wait. The internet is an arena. The clerk's office is a map. Walk by the map. And to you, yes, you, still here with me at the end of all this ink, thank you for listening to a story that is not glossy and not simple and not clean. Stories like this rarely are. I hope your house is kinder than mine was for a while. I hope your keys are just keys and not the sound of a threat rehearsing. I hope the people you love know how to be loyal when no one is looking. If they don't, I hope you have the courage to choose earned quiet over loud harm. I wish you good health and a family that practices tenderness like a daily chore. And when tenderness fails, as it sometimes will, I wish you the steadiness to reach for process instead of despair. If this story meant something to you, if it steadied your breath for even a minute, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and stayed with me for the next one. We'll keep telling the hard truths with documentary grit and a little vindication at the end, not for the spectacle, but for the relief. Before I turned out the light, I set the cup back on the sill and the keys back in their box. The seam held. The night held. I did not rehearse the fight in my head. I rehearsed waking up to a day that didn't ask me to be brave, only present. Somewhere across town, my parents sat on their new porch, the kind with a soft wobble and a view of nothing famous. And my father told my mother about the tomatoes, and my mother laughed. I opened the window a little to let the air in. It smelled like jasmine and old wood and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was freedom, the plain kind, the sort that requires mending and filing and a willingness to leave lovely rooms when they turn unkind. Maybe it was just evening. Either way, it was ours.